Chapter 1: The Rise of the Reluctant King. In the heart of medieval Europe, nestled between vast forests and treacherous mountains, lay the Kingdom of Eldoria. Once celebrated as a beacon of prosperity and culture, Eldoria had become a shadow of its former self. The grand castles that once stood as symbols of unity now loomed like hollow sentinels over impoverished villages. Roads, once bustling with merchants and travelers, were overgrown and perilous, preyed upon by bandits and left neglected by the crown. Years of misrule had drained the lifeblood of the kingdom, leaving it vulnerable to discontent and division. King Adalbert, the last in a long line of tyrants, had ruled with an iron fist. His policies prioritized the wealth of the aristocracy over the welfare of his subjects. The heavy taxes he imposed funded lavish feasts and opulent palaces while the common folk starved. His death came suddenly, the result of a mysterious fever, and with no heirs to claim the throne, a power vacuum threatened to plunge the kingdom into anarchy. In the wake of Adalbert's passing, the kingdom's nobility convened in Eldoria's crumbling capital. The Great Hall of Concord, once a place where monarchs celebrated alliances, now hosted a desperate gathering of lords and ladies. The air was thick with tension, each noble vying for influence while fearing the consequences of open conflict. Eldoria stood on the precipice of a civil war, with no clear path to unity. Among the nobles summoned to this fateful assembly was Edric, a distant relative of the late king. Unlike the flamboyant aristocrats around him, Edric was unassuming in both dress and demeanor. He arrived not in a gilded carriage but on horseback, his plain attire reflecting his humble life in the countryside. Edric had spent years far removed from courtly intrigue, dedicating himself to scholarly pursuits and the management of a modest estate. He was known among the people for his fairness in resolving disputes and his efforts to improve the lives of the villagers under his care. The lords of Eldoria were divided over who should ascend the throne. Some argued for a strong military leader, others for a wealthy noble capable of stabilizing the kingdom through sheer economic might. But as debates grew more heated, a quiet yet influential voice spoke up: Lord Alaric, a respected elder who had served as an advisor to several kings. Eldoria needs more than strength or wealth, he declared. We need wisdom, compassion, and a ruler who understands the struggles of the people. All eyes turned to Edric. At first, he protested. I am no king, he insisted. My hands are suited for the quill and the plough, not the scepter. But Alaric pressed on. That is precisely why you must lead. You have no hunger for power, no desire for grandeur. Eldoria needs a reluctant king, one who will rule not for himself, but for his people. The assembly's mood shifted. The lords, many of whom had witnessed the consequences of ambition-driven rule, began to see the wisdom in Alaric's words. After days of deliberation, a consensus was reached. Edric would be crowned king of Eldoria. The coronation took place in the ancient Cathedral of Light, its grandeur faded but its symbolism enduring. As Edric knelt before the altar, the Archbishop of Eldoria placed the crown upon his head. A murmur swept through the crowd as they beheld their new monarch, a scholar king, unadorned by the trappings of power but imbued with a quiet resolve. Despite the solemnity of the ceremony, doubt weighed heavily on Edric's heart. That night, he stood alone in the royal chambers, gazing out over the darkened city. He thought of the task ahead, a kingdom broken by greed and neglect, a people burdened by suffering and mistrust. How can I restore what has been lost? He whispered to the night. Edric's first days as king were marked by challenges that would have overwhelmed a lesser man. The royal treasury was nearly empty, the army demoralized and ill-equipped. The nobles who had supported his ascension now tested his resolve, each seeking to sway him to their own interests. Yet Edric's years of study and reflection had taught him patience and discernment. He listened carefully, sought counsel from trusted advisers like Lord Alaric, and began to lay the groundwork for his vision of a just and prosperous Eldoria. One of Edric's earliest acts was to abolish the punitive taxes that had driven many of his subjects into destitution. He decreed that the royal coffers would no longer be filled at the expense of the poor. To better understand the needs of his people, Edric disguised himself as a commoner and traveled the kingdom. In dusty taverns and crowded marketplaces, he listened to stories of hardship and resilience. He saw firsthand the decayed bridges, the abandoned farms, and the children who had never known a day without hunger. These experiences solidified Edric's resolve. Returning to the capital, he convened a council of reformers, including scholars, merchants, and representatives of the peasantry. Together, they drafted plans to rebuild the kingdom's infrastructure, redistribute land more equitably, and establish fairer laws. Edric's vision was not without opposition. Many nobles bristled at the loss of their privileges and plotted in secret against the new king. But Edric's unwavering commitment to justice won him the loyalty of the common folk, who began to see him not as a distant ruler but as a champion of their cause. As the months turned into years, Eldoria began to change. Villages once plagued by despair found new hope as roads were repaired, schools established, and markets revitalized. The seeds of prosperity were sown under Edric's reluctant yet determined reign. His journey from a humble scholar to a beloved monarch had begun, setting the stage for the trials and triumphs that lay ahead. Chapter 2: Rebuilding a Broken Land. Edric's ascension to the throne was met with cautious optimism by the people of Eldoria. While his coronation marked the end of the tyrannical rule that had plagued the kingdom, it also heralded the beginning of an uncertain future. The land was fractured, its people weary, its resources depleted, and its spirit broken. To many, the task of restoring Eldoria seemed insurmountable, but Edric's resolve was unshakable. He vowed to rebuild not only the kingdom's physical structures, but also its trust and unity. One of Edric's earliest and most symbolic acts as king was the abolition of the crippling taxes that had bled the peasantry dry. These levies, imposed by his predecessors to fund their extravagant lifestyles, had forced countless families into destitution. Edric's decree was met with jubilation among the common folk, but it also drew the ire of the nobility. Many lords viewed the tax cuts as a direct threat to their wealth and influence, and their discontent simmered beneath the surface. Determined to understand the full extent of his kingdom's suffering, Edric took an unprecedented step. He disguised himself as a common traveler and ventured into the heart of Eldoria. Accompanied only by a trusted aide, he journeyed through villages and hamlets, speaking with farmers, merchants, and laborers. The tales he heard were harrowing. Families recounted stories of losing their homes to tax collectors, of fields lying fallow because they could not afford seeds, and of children growing up in hunger and ignorance. These encounters deepened Edric's resolve and informed his policies. Upon returning to the capital, Edric convened a council of advisers. Unlike the royal courts of the past, dominated by sycophantic nobles, Edric's council included a diverse group: scholars, merchants, and even representatives of the peasantry. Together, they drafted an ambitious plan to rebuild Eldoria. At the heart of this plan were three key reforms: equitable taxation, infrastructure development, and land redistribution. Equitable taxation was perhaps the most controversial of Edric's reforms. Under the new system, taxes were based on an individual's ability to pay, with the wealthiest contributing the most. This shift alleviated the burden on the poor while compelling the nobility to share the responsibility of funding the kingdom's recovery. Predictably, the lords resisted. Some refused outright to comply, while others resorted to bribery and subterfuge to undermine the new system. Edric, however, was prepared. He established a network of inspectors to enforce compliance and introduce severe penalties for corruption. Over time, the resistance waned as the benefits of the new system became evident. Infrastructure development was another cornerstone of Edric's vision. The kingdom's roads, bridges, and irrigation systems had fallen into disrepair, hindering trade and agriculture. Using funds from the new tax system, Edric initiated a massive public works program. Laborers were hired to repair roads, rebuild bridges, and dig canals. These projects not only revitalized the kingdom's economy but also provided much-needed employment for the impoverished. Villages that had been isolated for years were reconnected to the broader kingdom, fostering a renewed sense of unity. Perhaps the most transformative of Edric's reforms was land redistribution. For generations, vast tracts of fertile land had been concentrated in the hands of a few powerful nobles, leaving many farmers to toil as tenants or laborers. Edric's policy aimed to break up these estates and allocate land to hard-working families. The redistribution was met with fierce opposition. Some lords accused Edric of undermining the natural order, while others conspired to depose him. But Edric's resolve did not falter. He personally oversaw the implementation of the policy, ensuring that it was carried out fairly and efficiently. Despite his successes, Edric's reign was not without challenges. The nobility's resentment grew, and rumors of rebellion began to circulate. Whispers of assassination plots reached the king's ears, but he refused to be cowed. Instead, he redoubled his efforts to win the loyalty of his people. He traveled frequently, often without the pomp and circumstance expected of a king, to demonstrate his commitment to their welfare. This approach endeared him to the common folk, who came to see him as a ruler who truly understood their struggles. Edric's reforms began to bear fruit. Fields that had once lain fallow were now vibrant with crops. Markets buzzed with activity as traders brought goods from neighboring regions. Schools were established, providing children with opportunities their parents could only dream of. The kingdom's transformation was slow but steady, and with each passing year, hope returned to Eldoria. Yet, the road to recovery was far from smooth. Natural disasters, such as floods and droughts, tested the resilience of Edric's policies. The king's leadership shone in these moments of crisis. He mobilized resources swiftly, ensuring that aid reached the affected areas. His actions further solidified his reputation as a compassionate and capable ruler. As Eldoria began to heal, Edric's vision extended beyond the kingdom's borders. He sought to establish alliances with neighboring realms, recognizing that unity and cooperation were essential for lasting peace and prosperity. These efforts would lay the groundwork for the bold initiatives that would define the next chapter of his reign. But for now, Edric's focus remained on the land and people he had sworn to serve. Rebuilding a broken land was no easy task, but Edric's determination and vision proved that even the most fractured kingdoms could be made whole. His reign became a beacon of hope, inspiring future generations to believe in the power of justice, resilience, and unity. Chapter 3: The Merchant's Gambit. As Eldoria began to stabilize under King Edric's reforms, the kingdom's coffers remained perilously low. The challenge of rebuilding had drained much of the available resources, and the economy, though improving, still struggled to regain its former vitality. Recognizing that internal efforts alone would not suffice to secure Eldoria's future, Edric turned his attention outward. He envisioned a prosperous Eldoria connected to the wider world through commerce, and he resolved to make this vision a reality. Edric's plan was as ambitious as it was unconventional. In an era where kingdoms often viewed trade as secondary to conquest, he sought alliances with the bustling trade cities of the Mediterranean. These cities, known for their wealth and influence, were hubs of commerce, where merchants bartered goods from the farthest corners of the known world. Edric's decision to invite these merchants to Eldoria was a bold departure from tradition, but he believed that fostering trade could transform his kingdom. Among the many merchants who responded to Edric's call was Leandro di Verona, a shrewd and charismatic trader from Italy. Leandro was no ordinary merchant. He was a visionary who had built a reputation for navigating complex trade networks and forging lucrative partnerships. When he arrived at Edric's court, his confidence and eloquence immediately set him apart. He presented the king with a daring proposal, a network of trade routes that would link Eldoria to distant markets, from the ports of Venice to the bazaars of Alexandria and beyond. Leandro's plan was grand in scope. It involved constructing new roads and refurbishing old ones, establishing secure trading posts, and negotiating agreements with foreign powers to ensure safe passage for Eldorian caravans. The project required substantial investment and a leap of faith, as success was far from guaranteed. Skeptics within the court were quick to voice their doubts. They derided the idea as a reckless gamble and warned that entrusting royal treasures to a foreign merchant was folly. But Edric, ever the pragmatist, saw the potential in Leandro's vision. He recognized that the risks were outweighed by the opportunity to secure Eldoria's economic future. After careful deliberation, Edric made his decision. He pledged royal backing for Leandro's venture, providing funds and logistical support. The partnership was formalized with a ceremony that symbolized trust and mutual commitment. Leandro, for his part, vowed to dedicate his expertise and resources to the success of the enterprise. The announcement of the project sent ripples through the kingdom, with some hailing it as a bold step forward and others predicting disaster. The early stages of the project were fraught with challenges. The construction of roads and trading posts faced delays due to weather, disputes over land, and attacks by bandits. Negotiating trade agreements with foreign powers proved equally arduous, as rival kingdoms and city-states sought to protect their own interests. Despite these obstacles, Edric and Leandro remained steadfast. The king's leadership and the merchant's ingenuity proved to be a formidable combination. They devised innovative solutions, such as employing local laborers to build infrastructure, which not only expedited progress but also provided much-needed jobs. Within a year, the first caravans began to traverse the newly established trade routes. These caravans carried goods that Eldoria had never seen before, spices from the east, silks from China, and precious gemstones from India. In return, Eldoria exported timber, grain, and finely crafted goods. The influx of wealth revitalized the kingdom's economy. Markets buzzed with activity, and merchants from distant lands flocked to Eldoria, drawn by the promise of profit. The once empty royal coffers began to fill, allowing Edric to fund further reforms and initiatives. The success of the trade network had a profound impact on Eldoria. It not only boosted the economy but also transformed the kingdom's cultural landscape. With merchants came ideas, art, and technology from far-off lands. Eldoria's towns and cities became vibrant centers of exchange, where different cultures mingled and enriched one another. The great market of Eldoria, established in the capital, became a symbol of this newfound prosperity and openness. However, the project's success was not without its challenges. The rapid influx of wealth and influence upset the established order, creating tensions within the court and among the nobility. Some lords, who had initially dismissed the venture, now sought to capitalize on its success, demanding a share of the profits. Others resented the growing prominence of merchants and the perceived erosion of traditional aristocratic power. These tensions occasionally erupted into open conflict, but Edric's deft diplomacy and firm resolve ensured that they did not derail the kingdom's progress. Leandro di Verona, too, faced his share of struggles. As the architect of the trade network, he became a target for envy and intrigue. Rivals attempted to discredit him, and conspiracies against him were not uncommon. Yet, his loyalty to Edric and his unwavering dedication to the project earned him the king's trust and protection. The partnership between the scholar king and the master merchant became the stuff of legend, celebrated in songs and stories for generations. By the time the trade network reached its full potential, Eldoria had been transformed. What had once been a struggling, isolated kingdom was now a thriving hub of commerce and culture. The success of the merchant's gambit solidified Edric's reputation as a visionary leader who was unafraid to take risks for the greater good. The prosperity that followed emboldened his vision for the future and inspired his subjects to believe in the possibility of greatness. The merchant's gambit was more than a bold economic initiative. It was a testament to the power of trust, collaboration, and innovation. It proved that even the most audacious dreams could become reality with determination and courage. For King Edric and Eldoria, it marked the beginning of a new era, one defined by opportunity, resilience, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Chapter 4: The Shadow of Betrayal. Prosperity often breeds envy and resentment, and for King Edric, the golden era he had ushered into Eldoria became the breeding ground for intrigue. While the kingdom's common folk flourished under his reforms, some of the noble class found their power diminished and their influence waning. These were men and women who had thrived under the old, corrupt order, an order that Edric's just governance had dismantled. To them, the king's success was a threat to their standing, and their simmering discontent began to fester into rebellion. At the center of this plot was Magnus, a former general of the Eldorian army. Magnus had once been a celebrated hero, but his unchecked greed and corruption led to his disgrace. Stripped of his lands and titles by Edric early in his reign, Magnus had harbored a deep grudge against the king. For years, he had lingered in the shadows, quietly gathering supporters among the disaffected nobles and mercenaries who shared his hatred for Edric. When the kingdom's prosperity reached its zenith, Magnus saw his opportunity to strike. The conspirators, a mix of envious nobles, disgruntled former officials, and hired swords, met in secret, their meetings cloaked in subterfuge. They forged alliances with bandits and other outlaws, building a shadow army to challenge the crown. Magnus, ever the tactician, devised a bold plan to seize Eldoria's capital in a swift and decisive strike. The rebellion would begin with a coordinated attack on key strongholds, followed by a march on the heart of the kingdom. News of the brewing rebellion reached Edric through his network of informants. Though troubled by the betrayal, he was not surprised. As a ruler who had spent years dismantling systems of exploitation, he understood that his enemies would eventually attempt to reclaim their lost power. What concerned him most was the scale of the threat. Magnus's forces were larger and better equipped than any rebellion Eldoria had faced in decades. The king knew that defeating this uprising would require not only military might but also cunning and resolve. Edric immediately convened his trusted council. Advisors debated strategies, with some advocating for defensive measures and others urging a preemptive strike. Edric listened intently, weighing each argument, before announcing his plan. The king's strategy was as audacious as it was calculated. He would draw Magnus's forces into the treacherous mountainous region known as Black Ridge, where the terrain would neutralize their numerical advantage. There, Edric would confront them in a battle that would determine the kingdom's fate. To prepare for the campaign, Edric took an unconventional approach. He traveled personally to villages and towns, rallying loyalists to his cause. His presence inspired the people, many of whom saw him not as a distant monarch but as one of their own, a leader who had worked tirelessly to improve their lives. Farmers, blacksmiths, and merchants took up arms, joining the king's forces out of loyalty and gratitude. These volunteers, though less trained than Magnus's soldiers, brought an unshakable resolve to the fight. As Magnus's army advanced, Edric's troops executed a series of calculated maneuvers, luring the enemy deeper into Black Ridge. The rebels, confident in their superiority, pursued without hesitation. What they did not anticipate was the meticulous preparation Edric had undertaken. His forces had fortified key positions, set traps along narrow passes, and established supply lines that ensured their endurance. By the time Magnus's army reached the heart of the ridge, they found themselves hemmed in by steep cliffs and impenetrable forests. The Battle of Black Ridge began at dawn on a misty autumn day. Edric's forces, though outnumbered, used the terrain to their advantage, launching ambushes and hit-and-run attacks that sowed chaos among the rebels. The king himself fought at the front lines, his swordsmanship and bravery rallying his troops and striking fear into the hearts of his enemies. Tales of his valor spread quickly, further demoralizing Magnus's army. As the battle raged, Edric's strategy unfolded with precision. He had divided his forces into small, agile units that could strike and retreat with ease. These units harried the rebels, drawing them into a series of traps that inflicted heavy casualties. Meanwhile, Edric's main force remained hidden, waiting for the opportune moment to deliver a decisive blow. That moment came when Magnus, desperate to regain control, committed his reserves to a full-scale assault. It was then that Edric's hidden forces emerged, encircling the rebels and cutting off their retreat. By nightfall, the rebellion was broken. Magnus's army lay in disarray, and the former general himself was captured while attempting to flee. Edric, in a display of both justice and mercy, sentenced Magnus to exile rather than execution. The disgraced general was stripped of his remaining followers and sent beyond Eldoria's borders, a symbol of the king's resolve to uphold his principles even in the face of betrayal. The victory at Black Ridge became a defining moment in Edric's reign. It demonstrated not only his military acumen but also his ability to inspire loyalty and unity among his people. The rebellion's defeat sent a clear message to would-be conspirators: Eldoria was no longer a kingdom where corruption and treachery could thrive. In the aftermath of the battle, Edric focused on healing the wounds left by the rebellion. He extended clemency to those who had been coerced into joining Magnus, offering them a chance to reintegrate into society. He also implemented measures to address the grievances that had fueled the uprising, ensuring that the root causes of discontent were not ignored. These actions reinforced his reputation as a just and compassionate ruler, one who prioritized the well-being of his people above all else. The shadow of betrayal cast a long pall over Eldoria, but it ultimately strengthened the kingdom. Through his courage and wisdom, Edric not only preserved his realm but also solidified the bond between ruler and subject. The battle became a legend, and the lessons learned from it shaped Eldoria's future, ensuring that the kingdom would remain united in the face of adversity. Chapter 5: The Scholar King's Vision. With internal threats quelled and the kingdom stabilized, King Edric turned his gaze towards a new horizon: the enlightenment of his people. He believed that the prosperity of Eldoria could not be sustained by wealth alone; it required the cultivation of minds and the spread of knowledge. Edric's reign marked a transformative era, one that would elevate Eldoria from a recovering realm to a beacon of culture and learning. Edric began by establishing schools in towns and villages, ensuring that education was no longer a privilege reserved for the nobility. These schools taught not only reading, writing, and arithmetic but also the principles of ethics, governance, and critical thinking. He sought to empower his subjects, believing that an informed populace would be the cornerstone of a just and progressive society. To achieve this vision, he mandated that every village have access to a teacher, whose salary would be funded by the royal treasury. The king's inspiration came from the flourishing centers of knowledge he had read about in his youth. Al-Andalus, with its grand libraries and advanced understanding of science and philosophy, served as a model for what Eldoria could achieve. Similarly, the Renaissance thinkers of Italy ignited his desire to foster innovation and creativity. Edric invited scholars, philosophers, engineers, and artists from across the known world to Eldoria, offering them patronage and the freedom to pursue their work without fear of censorship. One of Edric's most ambitious projects was the founding of the Great Hall of Wisdom. This monumental structure was built in the capital's heart, its architecture a blend of Eldorian tradition and influences from the Mediterranean. The hall housed an expansive library, filled with manuscripts and books collected from distant lands. Scribes worked tirelessly to translate texts into Eldorian, ensuring that knowledge from other cultures could be accessed and understood by all. The Great Hall of Wisdom was more than just a repository of knowledge, it was a hub of intellectual exchange. Scholars from various disciplines gathered there to debate ideas, share discoveries, and collaborate on ambitious projects. Alchemists worked alongside engineers to develop new technologies, while poets and playwrights drew inspiration from the diverse cultural influences that converged within the hall's walls. The synergy of different perspectives created an atmosphere of boundless creativity and innovation. Edric's vision extended beyond the intellectual elite. He recognized the importance of preserving and celebrating the culture of the common folk. He commissioned artists to depict scenes of everyday life, ensuring that the contributions of farmers, weavers, and blacksmiths were immortalized in murals and sculptures. Traveling performers, funded by the crown, brought music and theater to even the most remote corners of the kingdom. festivals celebrating Eldoria's heritage were held annually, fostering a sense of unity and pride among its people. Under Edric's patronage, Eldoria became a melting pot of ideas and cultures. Philosophers debated the nature of governance and ethics, while engineers devised irrigation systems that revolutionized agriculture. Medical practitioners shared knowledge with herbalists, blending traditional remedies with emerging scientific understanding. The kingdom's artisans created works of unparalleled beauty, their craftsmanship sought after by traders from distant lands. The ripple effects of Edric's initiatives extended beyond Eldoria's borders. Neighboring realms began sending envoys to study the kingdom's advancements, hoping to replicate its success. Eldoria's scholars were invited to lecture in foreign courts, spreading the kingdom's influence and solidifying its reputation as the enlightened kingdom. Edric's commitment to education and culture faced challenges, of course. Some nobles viewed his efforts as frivolous, arguing that resources would be better spent on fortifications or military expansion. Yet Edric, ever the scholar, countered their skepticism with reasoned arguments. He pointed out that a well-educated populace was a kingdom's strongest defense against tyranny and stagnation. Over time, even his critics could not deny the tangible benefits of his vision. Perhaps the most profound impact of Edric's policies was the shift in the kingdom's identity. Eldoria, once a land scarred by greed and division, became synonymous with enlightenment and progress. Its people took pride in their shared achievements, viewing themselves as stewards of a legacy that would inspire generations to come. Edric's reign lasted 3 decades, but the institutions he established endured for centuries. The Great Hall of Wisdom continued to attract scholars long after his passing, its archives growing with each generation. The schools he founded became the foundation of a system that ensured every child in Eldoria had the opportunity to learn and thrive. In his final years, Edric often walked the halls of the Great Hall of Wisdom, marveling at the vibrancy of the intellectual community he had nurtured. It was said that he took great satisfaction in seeing young scholars debate with the same fervor he had once brought to his studies. When he passed away, he left behind a kingdom transformed, a testament to the power of knowledge, culture, and vision. The legacy of the Scholar King remains one of the most celebrated chapters in Eldoria's history. His commitment to enlightenment laid the foundation for a golden age, proving that true leadership is not measured by conquest or wealth, but by the ability to inspire and uplift a people. Edric's vision, embodied in the institutions and ideals he left behind, continues to illuminate the path for those who seek to build a better world. Chapter 6: The Legacy of King Edric. Edric ruled Eldoria for 30 transformative years, his reign an era of unprecedented peace, prosperity, and enlightenment. His ascent to the throne had been marked by reluctance, yet his tenure as king became a testament to the power of humility, resilience, and visionary leadership. By the time he passed away peacefully in his 70th year, Edric had not only restored Eldoria but had elevated it to heights no one could have imagined. The final years of Edric's life were a period of reflection and quiet accomplishment. Though his physical strength waned with age, his mind remained sharp, and his commitment to his people unwavering. He continued to preside over the council, offering wisdom and guidance while allowing younger leaders to take on greater responsibilities. His ability to mentor and empower others ensured that the kingdom would not falter after his passing. One of the most enduring aspects of Edric's legacy was the institutions he established. The Great Hall of Wisdom remained the intellectual heart of Eldoria, attracting scholars, inventors, and artists from across the known world. Its archive swelled with knowledge, becoming a repository of human achievement. Future generations of rulers would often visit the hall, seeking inspiration from the ideals that Edric had championed. Edric's reforms in governance were equally impactful. The equitable tax system he introduced, coupled with the redistribution of land, created a more balanced and just society. Farmers thrived under policies that rewarded their hard work, and trade routes established during his reign brought wealth to every corner of the kingdom. The prosperity of Eldoria became the envy of neighboring realms, many of which sought to emulate Edric's model of governance. The king's commitment to education ensured that the common people were no longer voiceless or powerless. Literacy rates soared, and the schools he founded became the backbone of a system that nurtured generations of skilled artisans, learned scholars, and wise leaders. This investment in education created a populace that was informed, capable, and deeply loyal to the ideals of their king. As the years passed, Edric's humility and accessibility remained unchanged. He continued to visit villages, even as an elder, walking among his people with the same unassuming demeanor he had as a young scholar. These visits became the stuff of legend, as villagers would recount tales of their encounters with the king who listened, advised, and shared in their joys and sorrows. It was said that Edric's presence brought a sense of hope and reassurance, as though his very being was a promise of better days ahead. Edric's personal life, though marked by simplicity, was no less significant. He never married, dedicating his life entirely to the service of Eldoria. Yet, he surrounded himself with a close circle of trusted advisors, friends, and protégés who became his family in all but name. Among them were individuals from all walks of life, reflecting Edric's belief in the value of diverse perspectives. When Edric's health began to decline, the kingdom collectively braced itself for the inevitable loss. Despite his age, he faced his mortality with the same grace and courage that had defined his reign. He spent his final months ensuring that the transition of power would be seamless, mentoring his chosen successor and entrusting the future of Eldoria to capable hands. The day of Edric's passing was marked by profound mourning. The bells of the Great Hall of Wisdom tolled for an entire day, their somber chimes echoing across the land. People from every corner of the kingdom traveled to the capital to pay their respects. The king's body lay in state in the Great Hall, surrounded by the books, inventions, and artworks that symbolized his life's work. Edric was laid to rest in a modest tomb within the royal gardens, a testament to his humility. Above the entrance, an inscription read, "Here lies Edric, the scholar king, who ruled with wisdom, served with humility, and lived for the betterment of all." The site became a place of pilgrimage, where people came to draw inspiration from the life of a man who had truly embodied the ideals of leadership. The impact of Edric's reign extended far beyond his lifetime. His successors continued to build on the foundations he had laid, ensuring that Eldoria remained a beacon of hope and progress. The kingdom's influence spread, its ideas shaping the course of history in neighboring realms. Centuries later, historians and storytellers would recount the tale of King Edric, marveling at how a reluctant scholar had become one of the greatest rulers of his age. Today, the legacy of King Edric serves as a reminder that true leadership is not about power or ambition, but about service and vision. His life proves that even in the darkest of times, a single individual can illuminate the path to a brighter future. The story of Edric is not just the story of a king, it is the story of a man who dared to believe in the potential of his people and, in doing so, transformed the world around him.